Manizales has the weather of someone who can't make up their mind. In the morning, the sun beats down on the roofs of the wattle and daub houses, warms the stones of Caldas Park, and makes the dome of the cathedral basilica shine as if it were made of new copper. In the afternoon, clouds roll down from the hills, and the rain arrives without warning. Light at first, then heavy, the kind that forces you to run. The people of Manizales have learned to live with it. They carry umbrellas even when the sun is out. They go out anyway even if it's raining. It's a city that doesn't wait for the weather. It follows its own rhythm. In the La Estrella neighborhood, to the northwest, the houses are smaller and the sidewalks narrower. Families know each other by the name of their dog, by the smell from the kitchen, by the time they turn on the light in their room. It's the kind of neighborhood where a stranger stands out by the second block, where a good deed is talked about for weeks. Rodrigo Salcedo arrived in the neighborhood in February 2022 with his wife, Valentina Rios de Salcedo. They rented a 2-story corner house with a yellow facade, black railings, and a small garden that Valentina always kept tidy. He was 42, broad-shouldered, with a measured voice, the kind of man who, when he speaks, seems to always be right even if he doesn't say anything extraordinary. She was 38, with dark hair pulled back, an easy smile, and the kind of presence that makes people feel at ease without knowing why. Rodrigo introduced himself as a social projects consultant with experience in international cooperation. Valentina said she had worked for several years at a children's support foundation in Medellin. Neither of them showed credentials, nor was it necessary. In La Estrella, people are judged by what they do, not by what they show on paper. And what Rodrigo and Valentina did was visible from the start. 3 weeks after arriving, they organized a neighborhood park cleanup. They sent out a call via WhatsApp, provided the trash bags themselves, and brought coffee and pan de bono for anyone who joined in. 14 neighbors showed up. The following month, Valentina coordinated a collection of school supplies for families with children at the public school on the corner. Rodrigo spoke with the principal and managed to get the community hall loaned to them for the drop-off. Everything went smoothly, without any drama, with that quiet efficiency that builds trust faster than any speech. By Christmas 2022, the couple was already known in 3 neighboring neighborhoods. They organized a community novena with custard and fritters for the elderly living alone. Valentina went door to door with a notebook, noting who lived alone, who had limited mobility, who needed groceries delivered. She called it the Solidarity Census. She presented it as the first step toward providing better help. No one questioned it. It was exactly what it seemed. Lucia Pedraza joined as a volunteer in January 2023. She was 34 years old, worked as a social worker in the mayor's office of social development, and lived 6 blocks from the neighborhood. A co-worker told her about the Salcedo's initiative with genuine enthusiasm. She said it was the kind of community organization one hoped to find, but almost never did. No bureaucracy, no ego, with concrete results. Lucia went to the yellow-fronted house one Tuesday afternoon. Valentina welcomed her into the living room, which smelled of freshly brewed coffee and had walls covered with photographs of community activities. Smiling faces, children with backpacks full of school supplies, elderly women hugging Valentina with the look of someone receiving a visit from a family member. Rodrigo was in the back, reviewing a spreadsheet on the computer. He greeted her without standing up, with the familiarity of someone who already knew her. "When can you start?" Valentina asked. "Whenever you need me," Lucia replied. She was assigned to coordinate new beneficiaries, receiving applications from families who wanted to participate in the Easter campaign they were preparing. The campaign was called Mesa Lena. The idea was to deliver full food baskets and toys to 100 vulnerable families during Holy Week. It was a large operation, with corporate donors already confirmed, as Rodrigo explained, and it required a detailed record of each family. Full names of all members, exact address, employment status, approximate income, whether they were homeowners or renters, and whether there were elderly people or people with disabilities in the household. Lucia recognized the form. It was the kind of form she herself used at City Hall. Standard social work procedure, nothing unusual. She filled it out, organized it into folders, and began seeing families on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. They were weeks of intense and rewarding work. The families arrived with that mix of shyness and hope that people feel when asking for help for the first time. Lucia attended to them patiently, explained the process, and told them that the distribution would take place on Holy Thursday in the community hall. Not to miss it. That Mesa Lena was waiting for them. What Lucia didn't know then was that every form she filled out, every address she recorded, every detail about who lived alone or who depended on a minimum pension, didn't go into a folder of beneficiaries. It went into a different kind of list. A list that Rodrigo and Valentina Salcedo had been compiling long before they arrived in Manizales. A list from which no family, once inside, ever left the same way. Holy Week was 5 weeks away. The first sign was small. The kind you dismiss because it has a logical explanation, because people move, because life changes. Lucia dismissed it too, but she wrote it down. Doña Carmen Useche was 71 years old, lived alone in a 2-room house on 4th Street, received a minimal health pension, and had been one of the first families registered with Mesa Lena. Lucia had seen her on a Tuesday in February, had explained the process to her, and had told her that the handover would be on Holy Thursday. Doña Carmen had left the meeting with the confirmation slip folded inside her apron pocket. In the 3rd week of March, Lucia stopped by her house to verify the address before finalizing the list. The door was locked from the outside. The neighbor next door, seeing Lucia standing on the sidewalk, poked her head through the gate. She left about 2 weeks ago. She said she was going to visit a daughter in Pereira, but she didn't tell anyone. She just left like that. Strange, because she never did that. Lucia noted the case as a dropout due to a change of address and continued with the list. There were 87 families to confirm, and time was running out. The second sign came 4 days later. Hernan Ospina, 58 years old, a retired mechanic, lived with his 83-year-old mother in a rented house on Carrera Octava. He had filled out the form in detail. He had asked twice if the toys were also for grandchildren who visited on weekends. Lucia had told him yes. He had smiled with relief. When Lucia called to confirm the address, the number was out of service. She went to the house. A young man opened the door. He said he'd been living there for 10 days, that he'd rented directly from the owner, and that he knew nothing about the previous tenants. Lucia stood on the sidewalk a moment longer than necessary. That night, in her apartment, she opened the notebook where she kept her own notes and looked up the cases of people who had moved out since January. There were 6 families from the list who had disappeared from the neighborhood in less than 2 months. Without clear warning, without an obvious geographic pattern, but with a common characteristic that took Lucia 20 minutes to identify, and that, when she did, caused her a discomfort she couldn't immediately name. The 6 families had something in common. They were all elderly people living alone, or retired couples with no children nearby, or people with disabilities without an immediate family support network. Exactly the profile that the Mesa Lena form asked to identify with greater precision. Exactly the people who, if they went missing, would take longer to be searched for. The next day she went to the house with the yellow facade. Valentina welcomed her as always, with coffee, a smile, the living room tidy, and photographs on the wall. Lucia asked about the dropout cases, saying the number seemed high for such a short time. Valentina listened attentively, nodding several times. "It's normal in vulnerable populations," she said. "People move around a lot. Offers come in from family or subsidies in other municipalities. It's part of the fieldwork, Lucia. If we treat every dropout as a problem, we'll never finish. The explanation was reasonable. The tone was calm. But when Lucia said goodbye and walked toward the exit, she noticed that Rodrigo, who had been silent in the hallway throughout the conversation, was looking at her in a way that was anything but casual. It wasn't hostility. It was assessment. The same gesture of someone assessing how much the other person knows and how much more it would take for it to become a problem. That night, Lucia searched online for the name of the foundation in Medellin where Valentina claimed to have worked. She found nothing. She searched for Rodrigo Salcedo as a social projects consultant. Nothing there either. She searched for the Mesa Lena campaign using the names of the corporate donors Rodrigo had mentioned at the first meeting. Nothing matched. She told herself it might be her mistake, that the names might be misspelled, that not everything has a digital presence. But she kept searching, and at 1 a.m, when she typed the two names together plus the word Medellin into the search engine, a brief article appeared in the digital archive of a regional newspaper. It was dated 2020. It mentioned a couple under investigation for allegedly defrauding the elderly in the Laurels neighborhood. The names in the article were different, but the attached photograph, blurry and small, showed two faces that Lucia recognized without needing to enlarge it. Holy Week was set to begin in 11 days. Lucia printed the newspaper article at 6 a.m. She read it 3 times. The photograph was small and the angle wasn't direct, but the structure of the faces, the way he tilted his head slightly to the right, the way she kept her shoulders perfectly straight, was enough. It wasn't legal certainty. It was the certainty of someone who had been watching two people closely for weeks and suddenly saw them from the outside. She arrived at the social development office before 8. She looked for her boss, Dr. Aristizabal, a 55-year-old man who had held the position during 3 different administrations and who had a particular knack for listening attentively without committing to anything. She laid everything out for him. The 6 cases of discharge, the common profile of the missing families, the lack of a digital record for the Salcedos, the article in the Medellin newspaper. Aristizabal listened with his elbows on the desk and his fingers interlaced in front of his mouth. When Lucia finished, he leaned back in his chair. Lucia, the Salcedos have a letter of endorsement from the La Estrella Community Action Board. Councilman Bermudez mentioned them at the February session as an example of private initiative in community coordination. If I take this to the police with what you're showing me, which is a blurry photo and 6 families who moved away, they're going to ask me where the crime is. But the families disappeared without warning. People move, Lucia. They aren't obligated to tell us. She placed the printed sheet on the desk. The names are different, but the faces are the same. Aristizabal looked at the photo for a moment. Then he handed it back. Get me something concrete, and we'll talk. She left the office with the sheet in her hand and the feeling of having talked to a wall. It wasn't Aristizabal's indifference, it was calculation. A public official doesn't launch an investigation against a couple with the councilman's backing based on a social worker's intuition and an archive photograph. That's how institutions work. They need the mistake already made, not the one about to be made. That afternoon, she went to the neighborhood police station. She spoke with a young patrol officer who listened to her with an open mind and kindly explained that without a formal complaint from a direct victim or evidence of a crime in progress, no action could be taken. He suggested that if she had information about a previous investigation in Medellin, she should contact the Valle de Aburrá precinct directly. Lucia called that very night. An automated recording answered. She left a message. No one returned the call. Meanwhile, the Mesa Lena campaign continued to move forward with a sense of normalcy that was almost offensive. Valentina posted photos in the neighborhood WhatsApp group of donations arriving, stacked boxes, grocery bags sorted by size. Neighbors responded with heart emojis and messages of thanks. Councilman Bermudez shared one of the posts on his personal account with the caption, "Community Pride." Lucia continued working as a volunteer. She decided it was better to stay on the inside, that if she left, she would lose access to information, that the only way to achieve anything concrete was to observe closely without anyone noticing that she had changed her position. It was during an afternoon spent reviewing lists that she found the second layer of the form. Valentina had asked her to reorganize the physical folders by geographic area. As she sorted them, she noticed that several forms had notes on the back, written in pencil in small, cramped handwriting, different from Lucia's, different from that of any volunteer she recognized. They were abbreviations, PP with a number, AMS with another number, R with a value. It took her 10 minutes to decipher the pattern. PP stood for own pension. AMS stood for elderly person living alone. R was the approximate rent or, in the case of homeowners, an estimate of the property's value. Someone had classified each family not by need, but by wealth. She photographed the backs of 12 index cards with her cell phone, standing next to the bookshelf, with the living room door behind her. She put the cell phone in her pants pocket. When she turned around, Valentina was in the doorway. She didn't say anything for a second. She smiled the way she always did. "How's the reorganization going?" "Fine," Lucia replied. "I'm almost done." Valentina nodded, walked in, picked up a folder from the table, and left without looking back. Lucia waited 5 minutes before breathing normally again. That night, she sent a text message to her cousin Daniela, a lawyer in Bogota, with a single sentence. "I need someone to know what I'm finding." And she attached the photos of the backs of the index cards. Holy Week was starting in 7 days. Daniela responded at 11 at night with a call, not a text. That already said something. "Lucia, what you're sending me isn't an administrative oversight. Someone built a system for classifying the assets of vulnerable families. That has a purpose, and the purpose isn't to give them groceries." Lucia was sitting on the floor of her apartment with the printed photographs scattered around her. "What do I do with this? I need you to send me everything. The forms, the newspaper article, the termination notices. And I need you not to touch anything else in that house. Do you understand? Nothing else." Daniela had a contact at the Attorney General's office in Bogota. It was no guarantee of anything, but it was more than an automated recording. She told Lucia she needed 48 hours to make the right inquiries. While she waited, Lucia kept searching. It was the only thing she knew how to do when her anxiety had nowhere to go. She looked up the names that appeared in the Medellin article: Roberto Salinas and Viviana Rios. Different from Rodrigo Salcedo and Valentina Rios de Salcedo, but with a coincidence that wasn't a coincidence. The surname Rios remained. The woman hadn't completely changed her identity. She had changed just enough. With the correct names, she found more. A thread of comments on a Medellin citizen complaint forum, dated 2021, where 3 different people reported having been contacted by a community aid foundation that had collected detailed information about their homes under the pretext of a Christmas campaign. All 3 had subsequently suffered burglaries in their homes. In 2 cases, original documents had disappeared: deeds, savings passbooks, blank powers of attorney that some had kept for pending paperwork. On the surface, the scheme wasn't violent. It was patient. It was the kind that works precisely because no one sees it coming. Charity as the entry point, the form as the map, the campaign period as the window of opportunity. Lucia then understood why families disappeared from the neighborhood after being registered. They weren't leaving. They were being moved, or convinced to leave, or simply left so vulnerable, so stripped of the little they had, that there was no reason to stay. On the second day, Daniela called again. The contact at the district attorney's office had confirmed that a preliminary investigation was open in Medellin under the names Roberto Salinas and Viviana Rios, linked to aggravated theft and fraud against the elderly. The case file was active, but no arrest warrant had been issued because the suspects had left the city before charges were formally filed. "There's a prosecutor in Manizales who can take the case," Daniela said, "but she needs a formal complaint with evidence. What you have will work. The photos of the forms, the note, the record of the cases closed, the cross-check of identities. It's not perfect, but it's enough to open an investigation here. How long does that take? Under normal circumstances, weeks. But if the prosecutor understands that there's an active campaign with families at risk right now, she can move faster." Holy Week was starting in 4 days. The Mesa Lena handover was scheduled for Holy Thursday in the community hall. 100 registered families, 100 addresses in the Salcedo's possession, 100 asset profiles classified on the back of the index cards in small, cold pencil writing. Lucia drafted the complaint that very night. 3 pages. Timeline, names, attached documents, the link to the Medellin forum, the newspaper article, the photographs of the backs. She mailed it to the address Daniela had given her and printed it out to deliver in person the next day. Before going to sleep, she checked the neighborhood WhatsApp group. Valentina had posted a new photo. It was a picture of the community hall, already partially decorated for the Holy Thursday event. Yellow balloons, tables covered with white tablecloths, stacked boxes with colorful ribbons. The caption read, "We're almost there. Thank you to everyone who made this dream possible." 43 people had responded with emotional messages. Councilman Bermudez had commented, "An example of what can be achieved when the community comes together." Lucia closed her phone and placed it face down on the table. What none of the registered families knew, what Lucia hadn't yet fully calculated, was that the final phase of the scheme didn't take place during the handover. It happened afterward. When the families were distracted by the celebration, when they had let their guard down, when they had already confirmed their schedules, their routines, their absences from home to attend the Holy Week processions. The trap wasn't the form. The form was just the beginning. The trap was trust. And by the time someone sees it, it's already inside. Holy Week was starting in 3 days. The prosecutor's name was Andrea Montoya. She was 41 years old, had worked for 6 years on crimes against the elderly, and recognized the pattern within the first 10 minutes of reading. She called Lucia early Wednesday morning, 2 days before Holy Thursday. "This is enough to initiate proceedings. But I need you to do nothing that might alert them." Do you understand what I'm saying? Nothing. If they suspect someone is watching, they'll disappear before we can act. Lucia understood, or thought she understood. The problem was that Valentina had already started looking at things differently. It wasn't something Lucia could prove. It was an accumulation of small gestures. On Tuesday afternoon, when Lucia arrived at the house with the yellow facade under the pretext of reviewing the final list of beneficiaries, Valentina greeted her with her usual smile. But there was a moment, as brief as a blink, when her eyes darted toward the pants pocket, where Lucia kept her cell phone. Just a second. Then she went on talking about Holy Thursday, the markets, the delivery logistics. Rodrigo wasn't home, nor was the gray van that usually sat in front of the gate. Lucia asked about him casually. Valentina said he was coordinating the transport of the boxes with a supplier. It sounded reasonable. Everything in that house always sounded reasonable. That night, Lucia checked the real-time location she automatically shared with Daniela, a measure they had agreed on 3 days earlier. She sent her a short message. "Tomorrow is Holy Thursday." The prosecutor said they would act in the morning before the delivery. Daniela replied immediately, "Don't go to that community hall." Lucia didn't reply. Holy Thursday dawned with clear skies over Manizales, that crisp blue the city has when the wind blew well during the night. The churches opened at 6. In the center, in front of the cathedral basilica, there were already lines for the washing of the feet mass. The scent of flowers and warm wax wafted through the neighborhood streets from early on. Families were preparing with the ritual solemnity that Holy Week brings to the cities of the coffee region. Clean clothes, candles bought, the children with damp, combed hair. At 8 in the morning, Prosecutor Montoya coordinated with the judicial police the search operation at the house with the yellow facade. 2 units, no sirens, no visible uniforms. The plan was to arrive before the Salcedos left for the community hall, present the search warrant signed the previous day, and seize any documents found in the house while the arrest was being formalized. At 8:40 a.m., when the units arrived at the corner of La Estrella, the house had a padlock on the outside. The gray pickup truck was gone. The garden that Valentina always kept tidy had 2 overturned planters near the fence, the kind that happen when something moves in a hurry and there's no time to pick up what falls. Lucia received the call from the prosecutor as she walked toward the community hall. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. "They're gone," Montoya said. "Early this morning, we estimate, the closest neighbors heard the truck between 2 and 3. We have an active arrest warrant, but we need to know if they left anything in the hall. If the handover was staged, it's possible that today's operation was the final phase of the scheme, and that there are families who are already at risk." Lucia looked down the street. Half a block away, she could see the entrance to the community hall, with yellow balloons peeking out from above the half-open gate. "I'm going in," she said. "I don't recommend that." "I'm already going in," Lucia replied. The hall was set up exactly as in the photograph Valentina had posted the night before. Tables with white tablecloths, stacked boxes tied with colored ribbons, a banner printed with the Mesa Lena logo hanging on the back wall. But there was no one inside. No volunteers, no staff, no one from the organization. Just the setup, perfect and empty, like the set of a play that was never going to be performed. On the main table lay an open folder. Lucia approached. It was the final list of beneficiaries, 100 names, 100 addresses, with the arrival times each family had confirmed via WhatsApp in the days leading up to the event. In the margins of several entries, written in the same small pencil used on the forms, were new notes. Crosses next to some names, circles next to others, an R followed by a number in the cases Lucia already knew as elderly people living alone. These weren't delivery instructions. They were instructions of a different kind. A guide to who would be away from home during the afternoon processions, who lived without permanent company, who had no one nearby to notice an absence or a forced lock before it was too late. Lucia photographed every page with her cell phone. She called the district attorney. She described what she saw before her eyes. There was a brief, heavy silence on the other end. "Leave the room," Montoya said, "and call every family on that list that you can reach. Tell them not to leave their homes this afternoon. It doesn't matter how you explain it. Just tell them not to go out." Lucia stepped out onto the sidewalk with her cell phone in hand and the photographed list stored in the phone's memory. The neighborhood was beginning to stir with the slow, devout rhythm of Holy Thursday. Women with lit candles, families walking toward the church, children with braided palm fronds. No one knew that while the city prayed, 2 people who had learned to perfectly mimic the guise of kindness were driving away down a back road with 100 directions in their heads and plenty of time to use them. Lucia dialed the first number on the list. It rang 4 times. An elderly woman answered, her voice calm, like someone expecting something good that day. "Doña Esperanza, this is Lucia from Mesa Llena. I need to ask you a very important favor. Don't leave your house this afternoon. Please, stay inside and don't open the door to anyone you don't know. Did something happen with the delivery, dear?" Lucia closed her eyes for a second. Yes, ma'am. Something happened. But you're safe. Stay home. She hung up and dialed the next number. 87 calls remained. Rodrigo and Valentina Salcedo were captured on Easter Saturday at an intercity bus terminal in Armenia. They were traveling with documents in other people's names. The gray van had been abandoned in a parking lot in Pereira, with its license plates changed. They were carrying 2 briefcases containing original documents, savings passbooks, a deed, and 3 blank powers of attorney with signatures that the prosecutor's office later confirmed were forged. 11 direct victims were identified in Manizales. 9 elderly adults who had handed over original documents during home visits conducted by Valentina under the pretext of verifying information for delivery. 2 property owners whose properties had been fraudulently offered for rent to third parties using the forged powers of attorney.
Doña Carmen Useche, the first to disappear from the list, was found in Pereira, living with a daughter. She had signed a power of attorney without fully understanding what she was signing, convinced by Valentina that it was a formality to access a housing subsidy. None of the families Lucia called that holy Thursday afternoon had been robbed. 87 calls in 3 hours.
With the help of 2 volunteers who joined in once they understood what was happening. It was the only part of the operation that went exactly as planned. The investigation established that the scheme had been operating for at least 4 years in different cities: Medellin, Santa Marta, Ibagué, and now Manizales. Always the same pattern. A couple with different names, a charity campaign with a visible cause, a form designed to extract financial information, and a city willing to believe that kindness needs no verification. The trial began in February 2024. The courtroom was full every day. The sentence was 18 years for the cumulative charges of aggravated fraud, forgery of a private document, and conspiracy to commit a crime. The judge noted in reading the verdict that the premeditation sustained over years, and the deliberate selection of vulnerable victims constituted aggravating circumstances that did not allow for mitigation. Rodrigo listened to the sentence with the same composure with which he had presided over the community meetings in La Estrella. Valentina kept her shoulders straight until the end. The Neighborhood Community Action Board issued a statement acknowledging that the endorsement had been granted without proper verification. Councilman Bermudez issued no statement. Lucia continued working at the Social Development Office. She proposed a mandatory verification protocol for external organizations conducting data collection campaigns in vulnerable communities. The protocol was approved 6 months later, with minor modifications. It wasn't enough. It's never enough afterward, but it was something. What remained in La Estrella wasn't just mistrust, which arrived just the same, inevitable, as it always does after this kind of harm. There was also a question that neighbors asked themselves in whispers when someone new arrived in the neighborhood with a generous idea and the right words. Who verifies that those who claim to help actually do so? The answer, for now, was Lucia, a woman with a notebook, a cell phone full of photographs, and a habit of not dismissing the small signs. That, in a city that learned to trust too quickly, was more than there had been before.